Welcome to the Gems Podcast with Shom, a show about beat digging, records, and other things. Today, I'm joined by Dan Charnas, best-selling author, award-winning music and business journalist, producer of records and television, and associate arts professor at the Clive Institute of Recorded Music at New York University, co-creator and executive producer of the VH1 TV series The Breaks. He's the author of several books, including The Big Payback, Work Clean, and most notably to our audience, Dilla Time. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Dilla Time is widely celebrated as an accomplishment. You've had an incredible series of experiences before and after Dilla Time. That is from being a record label exec to playing a key role in establishing what we know as being a hip hop journalist. I knew you'd be an interesting guy to talk to.
Thank you.
Today, we're going to talk exclusively about Work Clean.
That's funny.
Sometimes we need a little levity.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here, Dan. As you know, we're recording on October 15th. It's one day after D'Angelo passed. It's a little unusual, I think, to handle a topic like this the day after his passing. When I heard about it, I was going through my day. I was actually quite busy, and I became, at least internally, a little destabilized. I found myself emotional and disoriented inside while I was acting like a robot on the outside and simply going through my tasks. I find it hard to talk about in some ways because everyone has their personal experiences with a great artist. I'm glad you're here, Dan. Glad we can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, like a lot of people, I'm a mess. I couldn't concentrate at all yesterday. Today is like the first time I'm seeing other people in the flesh, since this happened. Texting a lot of folks, trying to be a support for people who knew D'Angelo far better than I did. Although I was, really fortunate to be able to have, several conversations with him. And, people are going to be processing this. They're going to be processing it in music. They're going to be processing it with words on the page. As a writer, you think like, okay, well, do I have something to say about this? And I'm actually surprised at myself a little bit that I don't know that I have more to say, at least not yet. Right. I think that there are great people out there who can help us process this a bit. But I feel like, the prose that I wrote about Dilla Time, the prose that I wrote in Dilla Time about D'Angelo is kind of what I really wanted to say about him. And I'm actually really glad I had a chance to say it while he was alive, and that book made its way into his home.
I think it's well said. I think your book is extremely well written, and it is unique to have these observations of a book that only came out a few years ago with many of the key characters no longer with us. And it's just a unique thing to observe. It's a historical document of history that's happening in front of us.
Yeah.
Well, I knew we had to address this, so I appreciate your comments. I'm glad we can talk about it together. Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, we're all still processing it. It's a huge loss for our generation. It's a huge loss for music. And at the same time, I think D'Angelo's example is really about just being okay with what was and is, right? He had a 30-year long career. He had a certain amount of output. I think in an earlier time, if I were younger, I might feel like, oh man, we could have, and now I feel like he just gave us what he was here to give, no less than that.
And it was extremely high quality. So I'll say that. One of the greatest artists we've ever had in recent times. So, Dan, tell me about yourself. I mean, we just met in this podcast forum. Tell me about your life growing up.
I'm a New Yorker by birth, but I did a lot of my growing up in Maryland, in between Baltimore and Washington. My mother, started her own career as a professor at the University of Maryland teaching social work, and then she became a psychotherapist. And I still come by a lot of those traits, you know, psychotherapeutic traits. Honestly, when I interview people as a journalist, I feel like in many ways, I speak the language of therapy. But I think the greatest thing about growing up where I grew up is that I was completely immersed in Black radio in the 1970s into the 1980s at a time when um, we were experiencing a real sort of cultural regression in the music business, like that sort of backlash against disco. And so that loving Black music and Black radio at a time when Black music was being sort of squeezed and chased off the pop charts and not programmed on MTV, it really made me very political. I understood the relationship between race and music at a very early age. And that ended up becoming my course of study. When I went to college, I was an undergrad at Boston University. I became an urban and African American studies major. And eventually what I ended up, doing my senior thesis on was racial segregation in the music industry. So for me, it was always really looking at the ways in which the music business um, racketeers, racketeers Black artists, and yet farms the music, right, and the culture. And of course, around that time, hip hop is emerging, and all of the genius of that, the new genius ways that it made music, the new genius ways that it approached lyrics, and also the genius ways that it claimed agency, over itself, that it felt to me almost like a religious need to sort of join and help in any way that I could. And so I started writing about hip hop. One of the first like actual pieces of journalism I did as a student, I covered the Def Jam tour in 1987. And that, I got to meet and talk to all these people before they were big stars, from Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff to Rakim, to Houdini. Like, that was something, man. And so that was the start.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's so interesting. How did you shift from music journalism into the record business?
Well, I think it's just, with hip hop, it was, I'll do anything. When I moved back to New York from Boston after graduating, I was like, I will do anything. I will write bios. I will answer phones. I will stuff envelopes. I will do anything to be around this music and help in any way I can. That was the main goal. It wasn't to like make a name for myself. It was to really just try, like, I felt hip hop had the potential to be a revolutionary popular music. Not pop, but popular. You know what I mean? So, and that's what I did. And my first job, in the hip hop business was working in the mailroom of Profile Records and answering phones, when the receptionist took a lunch break. And that's how it started for me. And so right away, I was in the house that Run DMC built. And eventually, what was really interesting about even Profile Records, we're talking about 1989, there were still no like hip hop first people at Profile. I know that sounds crazy, but Brian Chin, who signed like Special Ed and Rob Bass, and Corey, who signed Run DMC, they didn't really, like, hip hop wasn't their number one. Like Brian Chin will tell you, like he was into dance music, right? He was into house and to disco, and that was his pedigree. And he was just like Corey, really, really good at identifying talent in hip hop and was open to hip hop. But none of them would call themselves hip hop junkies, I don't think. Me, I was, and I was the first, hire there, right? Who was really that. Which is crazy in 1989. But so that, I think, is how I ended up, listening to demos and then finally being asked to promote records and call DJs. And so I was one of a very small circle of kids who worked at these record companies, like Bobby Garcia at Def Jam, like Jeff Sledge at Wild Pitch, who, called these mix show DJs all around the country to get them to play our records, because there wasn't a rap station at that point. Pop stations didn't really play any kind of rap or hip hop. So my Friday and Saturday nights were take a bag of records, go to Kiss FM, give some records to Red Alert, get on the train, go across town, give some records to Chuck Chill Out and to his assistant, Funkmaster Flex, and repeat the next week.
That is so handmade. It's so in person, and it's so cool to hear. I think that's a hell of an experience that you just described.
It was an experience, that's for sure. No, listen, I mean, I'm grateful to have lived through that time, and I think the reason I was able to get in is because very few people were interested in getting in. I mean, that's what people don't really understand about hip hop back then. It wasn't like people were banging down the doors of Profile Records to work at Profile Records. And no, you want to talk about, what college graduates of any, racial cultural origin were going for. It wasn't that. Like, if they were interested in music, it was mostly R&B, right? So Black radio wasn't really checking for, to program. They were pushing hip hop off the air even in that point. No venues in New York were willing to, have hip hop nights. That's why all the clubs, by 1989 were like roving clubs. It was a different time, and so what bound people together was the love of the music.
I mean, we did move quickly through some of your time starting in the world of journalism, shifting to being in the record business. You personally, were you writing the whole time? Were you also actively publishing?
I started, like I said, as a student journalist. My first professional pieces were for the Boston alternative weekly newspaper called the Boston Phoenix. And I just managed to like wheedle my way in there. Again, they had nobody writing about hip hop, intelligently. And then by the time I was working for Profile, there was this magazine that was being published out of Harvard called The Source. And I just called them up one day. I'm like, yo, I just love this. Like, I've never seen anything like this. And so I became friendly with John Schechter and would go up to Boston, occasionally and visit them at their radio show at Harvard's radio station, WHRB. I met Dave Mays, met Ed Young, would later on meet James Bernard. And so I was already kind of in the posse, so to speak, before they moved to New York. And then they did move to New York just a few blocks down from where I worked at Profile. So on my lunch breaks, I'd go over to The Source. Occasionally John would call me to do like cover stories and stuff. Like I did the first cover story on Ice Cube, the first one on Public Enemy, the second one on LL Cool J. When Mama Said Knock You Out came out, that was me going out to LL Cool J's place on Long Island and watching the video for the Boomin' System, for the first time with him.
What an album. I mean, what an album. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, but again, LL Cool J was never going to be in Rolling Stone, right? At that point. Like now, of course, he's everything, but back then the only place that was going to give him a cover story was the Source, and we did. It's funny. I saw him again. The first time I saw him many years later was at Power 106 in Los Angeles when I was, doing a little segment on the radio station. This is supposed to be 5 years later. And he was being interviewed. And I said, listen, man, I don't know if you remember me, but I came out and interviewed you for The Source when you were doing Mama Said Knock You Out. And he goes, you damn sure were.
Oh,
Yo. But yeah, I wouldn't trade it for anything, man. I mean, of all the choices I could have made in my life that would have put me in a place where I have a bigger house or more money or whatever, like, I'm sure I could have made those decisions, but to have been in some of those rooms, in some of those moments, man, that's a life.
you certainly led an interesting life. I mean, even at this point that we're talking, you're straddling the line between being someone at a important record label with great hip hop artists, legends, and you're writing at the same time. For some reason in my mind, I didn't know you can do both, but apparently you were.
There were people who didn't think you could or should, but the issue was there were so few people who wrote well about hip hop at that time. And I don't want to imply that there weren't. I mean, we all looked up to Nelson George, to Harry Allen, to Greg Tate, and hip hop as it became more popular came to, the writing of everything came to include people like me and Schechter, but also Dream Hampton and also Kierna Mayo, and you know what I mean? So it's becoming somewhat larger, but there's still not a big pool of folks who are doing it. So a lot of us are just doing double duty. Like, I think the where it became an issue for me is James Bernard, who was one of the partners in The Source, he had a monthly column in the magazine of Sam Goody Records, right? So back then, record chains had their own magazines, like Tower had Pulse. Sam Goody had a magazine called Request. And so he was the monthly rap columnist for Request. And then when he left to go write for the New York Times, he handed that shit off to me. What a great opportunity. And I had a great editor. But then I got hired by Rick Rubin, and I told my editor that I was doing that. And the line that my editor drew was, well, you're moving from this independent label to a major label, and that's going to be a problem because you're not going to be able to review those records, right? And I totally get it, right? There are ways in which I wished I had kept writing more diligently, even if not for The Source, or part of me just wanted to focus on making records. So I had been writing for many, many years, but I didn't see myself at that point as some sort of historian or like, I was like, I want to be closer to the music. And so for that meant being an A&R person and producing and working in the studio with artists.
Let's talk about that part of you. What type of artists come to mind that you work with that maybe made a personal impression on you?
Well, there were the artists that I worked with as a promoter and marketer, and then there were the artists that I worked with as more of an A&R producer, right? So when I was at Profile, I was mostly promoting, right? There would be acts that I would bring in occasionally, and sometimes I would work with them. Obviously the big one for me was this duo from East Orange, New Jersey called The Art of Origin. And it was one of those moments when I heard the demo that I had never heard anything like it. It was not like Bomb Squad, frenetic sampled music, sample collage, plus all of the political lyrics, right? Nor was it the sort of beautiful, quirky Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Native Tongues kind of stuff, right? Wasn't Afrocentric. It was this really dark, spiritually dark, moody, but hard-edged hip hop. I had never heard it. I'm not, even now, I'm having a hard time explaining what it was, because even since then, there has been nothing like it. And so I got to know the producer of the Art of Origin, one half of the Art of Origin, a guy named Kerry Chandler. And Kerry's partner, the MC, was a guy who called himself Chino XL. And I brought this demo into Corey Robbins, and he didn't like it. Nobody on the A&R staff liked it. I really wanted to sign them. Nobody liked it. They actually ended up signing another record that Kerry produced for another artist named Taylor. And this is when Kerry is just getting started as a house producer. Now, of course, Kerry Chandler is known around the world as one of the most influential house producers and DJs of all time. But, I knew him as this incredibly gifted hip hop producer who also did house. And I kept, doing music with them, and I kept bringing music to Corey, and finally Corey said, I don't want to hear anything more from these guys. Don't bring me their music anymore. And I said, they're really, I was trying to convince him, and he says, if they ever get signed anywhere, I will eat the tape. I'll eat the tape. And of course, how this all ends up is I end up going to work for Rick Rubin a year later. Rick does let me sign them. We do generate a few tapes, but I never go back to Corey Robbins and make him eat it. So that's the kind of guy I am.
That's a hell of a story. I mean, I didn't know who you were going to talk about until you explained the whole thing. So legendary rapper Chino XL, hell of a lyricist. Hell of a lyricist. Good ear, Dan.
I don't know, because for that demo, of course, I heard the Far Side, and I was like, oh, I like them, but and of course I was wrong about that. I brought Rick the House of Pain demo with Jump Around on it. I'd say, I really like this song. He's like, yeah, I really like it too. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know if they have any, I'm not hearing anything else. Like, is it just this song? He's like, yeah, maybe it's just that song. And we were right, but we were oh so wrong. So, I mean, look, I mean, we're jumping way far ahead, but I don't know that I had the temperament to be an A&R person. I have more of a producer's temperament, which isn't to say that I necessarily have bad taste, but I don't have the hustle nor the killer instinct to sign things that I am not completely enthusiastic about. So yeah, but that's all right. Not everything's for everybody. I'm glad I did what I did.
I mean, maybe we don't have to talk in a linear fashion, but at this point in the story, it makes sense considering where you are now, because you have a very unique set of skills as a writer, as a person with a genuine ear, and a way to get along with people. So, I mean, writing Dilla Time takes a certain amount of entrepreneurial spirit. So it all kind of led you to where you are now.
But I'm also older now, right? And more mature and more experienced. So if I could go back, right, I would do A&R a completely different way.
Okay.
I remember a good friend of mine, Alex Mejia, who was a DJ at KMEL in San Francisco, very influential hip hop station. He's like, you could have signed Coolio and you didn't sign Coolio. Like, I don't like Coolio. God bless him, But he's like, I can't believe you, stupid idiot.
You've lived to tell the tale. So I'm going to I'm going to jump ahead. How did you meet J Dilla?
Well, 1991, I went to go work for Rick Rubin. So I left Profile Records, moved to the West Coast. We had Rick had just signed Sir Mix-a-Lot. So like Baby Got Back was like one of the first records that I worked there, which was, ended up being a very huge crossover pop hit. But my own sort of signings were not, it took a long time to make the records. I made one record at a time, and it just, again, it wasn't hustling, like let's say Sean Combs was hustling, right? Carrie eventually just sort of lost the energy to be a part of the Art of Origin thing. So it was just Chino. So we had to figure out an identity for Chino and under very little budget, right? Because it's not like Rick was throwing a whole bunch of money after these rap records. He really still had that Def Jam spirit of just making a record in your dorm room, throwing it against a wall and seeing if it sticks. So we had really stitched together Chino's solo album on a shoestring budget. I had to beg Rick just for the money to mix it. And then the album came out and it did better than people thought it would, right? And so that gave us a real budget for the next album. Then Rick got divorced from Warner Brothers, and Warner wanted to keep Chino, which I thought was fantastic, right? And so I ended up executive producing that album for Warner Brothers, and we now had a real budget to work with. And so my favorite producer at the time, like, yo, we got to work with JD, this kid from Detroit, right? And so in the summer of 1999, we got on a plane from LA and we flew to Detroit. Yeah.
How did you hear of JD?
Well, remember one of the groups that I didn't sign was the Far Side. They signed a Delicious vinyl. So I ended up but we were all like making records in the same studio. We were all working out of Hollywood Sound. So I ended up getting to see how they made their first album with Jay Swift as their producer. And then we heard that Jay Swift was leaving the Far Side to start his own label. And I'm like, Rick, we got to sign Jay Swift. Jay Swift is the future. We need his label. And we lost that bidding war to Tommy Boy. And in the meantime, I'm looking to Mike Ross. I'm like, man, what are the Far Side going to do now that Jay Swift is gone? He's like, oh, no, we found a great new producer out of Detroit. Like, Detroit? What? No hip hop had come out of Detroit at that point, right? All we knew was MC Braid from Flint and Awesome Dre, which had been on MTV in the late 80s. I was like, JD, who's this kid from Detroit? Like, really? You're going to entrust the Far Side, who already have a gold record or something like that? I think maybe 300,000, 400,000 copies to this unknown producer from Detroit. And he's like, no, he's great. He's great. And then, of course, I heard Runnin' for the first time. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is great, right? So we knew that JD had gotten involved with Tribe Called Quest, that he was part of this production collective. So that was 1995 when I first heard Runnin', but I didn't get a chance to work with JD till 99. So that's 4 years later. So we fly to Detroit. We drive out to Conant Gardens. We go to the house on Nevada. We go down in the basement, and there's Common Sense. Like, Common Sense is there. Like, whoa, what's Common Sense doing here? And even at that point, like, he wasn't fully evolved into Common yet in our minds. And, we hung out. We went to go get Mongolian barbecue. We went to the studio. JD laid down some tracks that we had picked out from the beat tape that he had given us. And he broke out. Maybe he went to the strip club. I don't know. We were left in the studio just sort of working. And that was it. Like, that was our weekend in Detroit. There was no sense, again, for me that I'm there as a journalist. I brought my camera to Detroit, but I brought it because we were going to go visit the Motown Museum. Oh, my God. And no I love JD. I was the reason we came out there, but I had no conception that this was Coltrane. Not yet. It wasn't until we got back to LA, we started mixing the album, that I started listening, because you're listening to music when you're mixing over and over and over again. And I started listening, like, what the hell is wrong with that rhythm track? What the hi-hat sounds like it's off. And I literally had to like take the beat and put it in my Pro Tools, it really was Digital Performer, to look at the waveform to see where all of these beats were falling. Cause I felt like I was going crazy listening to this. And the hi-hats are perfectly on time. It's the snares are coming early, right? And then within a year, you start to hear that same sound being copied. Music Soul Child, High Tech and Quali, right? Floetry, Jill Scott, even, and then within a year, like Michael Jackson, Brandy. By that time, I was out of the music business. By the time if I fully realized what was happening, and I wasn't a music journalist anymore either. But I knew even then, like, people are copying his style. And what was crazy about it is that the beat tape we got from him was really the first that he generated that had those kinds of misalignments in them.
I love hearing your experience of it, the description of the basement, the beat tape comment, of course, and you explain very well why it's different. When I heard that beat tape, I mean, I grew up in Toronto, Canada. It was copied by some guys and then brought to Toronto and quite soon popularized there.
Yeah.
And it was really popular in Toronto, I can tell you that. And as a teenager, I knew this was dope, but I didn't have the words to understand why this feeling is this way. I just loved it. And I was
Right.
just studying these beats and I was like, wow. And, that beat tape that you spoke about, and then shortly after, there was a record pressed, unreleased Dilla tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I just felt like you're hearing something that not everyone's hearing. It's like a small group of people are hearing this. It felt like a secret that all my friends knew.
Yep.
And that's part of the myth of Dilla.
It's also hard for some people to hear, right? It is one of those things that you almost have to have a kind of sensitive nervous system to really even understand what's giving you that feeling, right? Which is why people refer to these beats as drunken, limping, sloppy. They're not. They're not. But if you don't have a sensitive enough nervous system, if you don't have a sensitive enough ear, you're not necessarily going to hear it, right? These small increments in time. Jumping way in the future, when I was executive producing The Breaks, we had a moment where we shot this scene of this live performance. And so DJ Premier did the track and they performed over this track live. And so we're recording the vocals live as the track is playing. And there are a number of different takes that all have to be then put together in post. And the camera switches between the takes as the music track plays. And so we had a track of the backing track, and then we had the vocals that we recorded. And, usually when you're doing audio editing, you're just lining up, wherever the peak is, right? Wherever the clap is, even of the slate. The problem is it didn't sound, when we heard it back in post, it didn't sound like it did live. It sounded great live. It sounded corny and weird in post. Why did it sound that way? Because in the software that the post-production people were using, they only had 30 frames per second to play with. And they lined those things up as close as they could. But that 30th of a second was not fine enough for the nervous system attuned to what sounds on time, what sounds rushed, and what sounds like relaxed. And the performance we heard live was relaxed, but they're not even thinking that the vocal comes just a little after the beat. Not even are they thinking that. They have no means to do it unless we take it out of the Avid, put it in Pro Tools where there's a lot more frames to play with, and then export it back in. I know this is very, very technical, but the point is, these are very, very small units of time that create huge differences in the way that we feel things. And so it always bothered me thereafter to hear when people discuss J Dilla and his time feel. They would call it sloppy, or they would say, oh, he just doesn't quantize his beats, like as if the thing that he's doing is all freehand and not programmed, which was crazy to me. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, don't you motherfuckers have ears? Like, can't you hear that snare is coming in at the same place in every measure? It's just coming in a little early. So it was that anger, that eventually, provoked me to write the book.
I think it's very important. I was going to ask about your motivation. I mean, that's fair. Anger or motivation. Sometimes they're friends.
Yep.
The way that you took the time, I mean, you explained it now to us in the book. You did a great job of explaining it in more detail and elevated an already celebrated artist. It gave it legitimacy to different people who were not as close, who couldn't get it, and explain something that's hard to put into words.
That's what I wanted to. Thank you. That's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to not only give language to it that our people had not come up with, but also to say, hey, he's more than just who's the best hip hop producer. He's bigger than hip hop, as they say.
Yeah, he is. One part that I found particularly interesting in the story of Dilla was his group dynamic within the Ummah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to say Q-Tip is a superstar,
mm-hmm.
and he comes from a history of being in a group.
Right.
He's a bit of a collectivist, if you think about it.
That is exactly the word I would put for it. He is an absolute collectivist. He believes in, and by the way, he wasn't alone. That's why the Bomb Squad was the Bomb Squad and not Hank Shockley produces, right? The history of hip hop is the history of collectives, like power, strength in numbers. And not just strength in numbers, but the idea that we work together. When we work together, we create something better. And the Ummah weren't alone in terms of collective. There was the track masters, the hitmen, that's all that Tip was trying to emulate.
I think Q-Tip was his mentor. He helped discover him. And I really enjoyed how you articulated Dilla kind of going on his own. If you think about it from afar, it was maybe bittersweet at the time, but we're talking about Jordan coming off the bench. This is an all-time great. It was for the best in the end.
Right.
Yeah. When you were working on the book, tell me about your observations about Slum Village.
Mm-hmm.
What was your exposure to this first group that Dilla was in?
That was actually part of why I wanted to go to Detroit, because I obviously known the stuff that JD was producing for the Far Side and Busta and Tribe. But it wasn't the work on Beats, Rhymes, and Life that made me buy that ticket to Detroit. It was that Slum Village album that started circulating I had a friend who worked at A&M, and I knew that they had signed them. And then in early 1999, A&M was shuttered. They literally fired everybody. And the artists who were signed to A&M, including Slum Village, who were just about to put their album out, were scattered to the wind. And so I don't know how this happened, but their manager, Tim Maynor, found me. And maybe he found me, I don't know, because of Junior Regisford. I had a friend who worked for Junior Regisford then. And he gave me Fantastic Volume 2. Man, I couldn't believe it. I think that was it. Like, that's when I said to Chino, we have got to go to Detroit. This shit is incredible. I don't know why. I was working at Forrest Whitaker's label at the time, Spirit Dance, and I think I was kind of on my way out there. Like, I didn't want to work there anymore. So I think if I felt like that was a good place, I probably would have wanted to sign Slum Village. But then again, I was working with, our handler at Sony pretty much thumbs down everything we gave to him. So that was my introduction. Slum was my gateway to JD. But then, of course, in later years, especially after sort of really dwelling with JD and, with this music, I understand, and I've made this claim. I made this claim on another podcast many years ago before the book came out, and I still make it here. I think Fantastic Volume 2 is one of the most important albums of the last 100 years because it does mark the debut of this new time feel that will go on to influence hip-hop, R&B, jazz, and pop music. The first place you hear it is on Slum Village Fantastic Volume 2.
Well said. I couldn't agree more. I mean, when you put it that way, it is true.
But also, let's not forget the lyrical part of that, right? And the delivery part of that. Like
Underrated part.
Absolutely underrated. And I think T3 is, that each of them are really great MCs of their own. I give special shine to T3 because he is a rhythmic writer. And I think we fetish this idea that what people say is somehow more important than how they play the words. And he plays the words. He plays with words, which isn't to say that he doesn't spit some amazing lines. But for me, the attraction of T3 is not some phony ass image or some crazy ass gangster posturing, right? This is a guy who knows how to, like the same way like Dizzy Gillespie would blow the horn. This is a guy who knows how to use his instrument and does it to great effect. Wajid has said, nobody ever rode a JD beat like T3. Not Buster, not Tip, not anyone, right? Not Common, right? And Common would probably tell you himself, right? T3, he's the shit.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it as like he was so influenced by the music and he rode the beat in a way that complemented the emptiness, and it was perfect for that time. And I really liked Batin as well. I thought they just
Complemented the emptiness.
Yeah. I thought they just had chemistry. I mean, I think you said it better than me, but it was such a great album and hard to recapture that feeling sometimes.
Impossible.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the story as well with Dilla, his many recordings and many times, some great albums, many great albums, but it just felt like there was more there that we didn't always hear.
Yeah. True.
Yeah. So I'll be very honest with you. I've been listening to your work after Dilla Time, Work Clean. It's good timing for me to read it. I felt like I got a lot going on and I could get life more organized. And I know that You teach, you work in television, you do many things in your life. How have you progressed with your, let's say, interests in your career following the success of Dilla Time?
Well, Work Clean preceded Dilla Time, actually.
Okay.
It was that sort of bridge between the Big Payback and Dilla Time.
I give myself a C if I was in your class already based on that.
It's all right, man. We're not being graded. It's just a conversation. Uh, you know, after I wrote the Big Payback, I put a lot into the books that I write. Big Payback was 300 interviews written over the course of and conducted over the course of 4 years, 660 pages. After you write something like that, you don't want to. You've become very gun shy, right? So I get gun shy after I finish a book because finishing it feels so good because your time is your own again, and you're not under deadline, and you come back to the open arms of your family, and you can't imagine going back out there again. But it's usually anger or curiosity or fascination that pulls you back in. And so for me, my second book was not about hip hop at all. It was this sort of real dissatisfaction with working in the media world because as an author, it's very hard to support yourself just writing. And so I worked a day job working for a large media company called Radio One, where I was the editor of a bunch of websites. And it was not a well-run organization. It was very dependent on people's whims and personalities. Communication was horrible. They treated the editorial employees really badly. And here I am, right in the middle of all this stuff, feeling like I'm not standing on any sort of ethical ground. And at the same time, just for pleasure, I'm reading all of these sort of culinary narratives like Anthony Bourdain and Michael Ruhlman and Bill Buford, and really seeing like there's this incredible ethic and discipline in the kitchen that I wished I had in my daily life working in this office. And, the term mise en place is what they use to talk about that ethic, right? They'd say, well, mise en place is just how you organize your workstation, but it's also how you think, right? And there's certain principles, uh, being honorable with your word, planning ahead, but being flexible, communicating well, respect that goes up the chain, but also respect that goes down. All the things that were missing from my daily work life. And so I thought I'd really, really like to. I think that maybe at first I was almost thinking like, do we need to make like an app, an organization app, or something? Well, my talent is writing. Maybe I should write about this. Like this would be a good book. And so in order to sort of get a head start on the book, I pitched it as a story to NPR, a radio story. And so I actually went into kitchens under the aegis of NPR, recording chefs and interviewing them about mise en place. And then was that as the foundation, I sold a book based on that. And so for the next 2 years, I was in and out of professional kitchens and culinary schools while I taught at NYU, right? Teaching music history and writing at NYU. I was building this other world, which ended up being Work Clean.
I think it's impressive how you've navigated all these kind of different phases of your life and your career, and you go really all in. I mean, when you're writing a book, you're quite dedicated. There are easier ways to write a book, but you are immersing yourself in these worlds. And I think that's commendable. And the fact that you keep building through new phases and new interests is fascinating.
Well, thank you. I talked to my wife about this a lot. I think, first of all, that work ethic is also a kind of mise en place, meaning when I left California, when I left Rick Rubin, after I worked for Rick, I wrote comedy for TV for a while, and I just felt like I didn't just want a job. I wanted kind of a new calling, a foundation. And so that's when I went and I got my master's in journalism. And all of the book writing and stuff came out of that, that change. But it's the idea, the ethic that as a writer, we're not just here to opine, right? We're also here to dig and report. And you're really only as good as your reporting. And so reporting became a religion for me. And I remember telling my first journalism professor at Columbia, like, I just don't feel like I don't know if I got it. I don't know if I got the story. And she goes, you over report. Like, don't worry about that. You did good. Right. And so that made me feel like, okay, all right. So maybe I know how to do this. It's still very scary. Anytime you report, I tell my students that here at NYU, like, reporting is scary business because people can always say no, right? A lot of people, even for Dilla Time, said no before they said yes, right?
Let's talk about that, because it's reading the book and then thinking, well, how did you make this book? It sounds scary because
It was scary, yo. It was
yeah,
scary.
because you're
I
discussing
get scared just thinking about it.
the life, the afterlife. Not everyone agreed all the time, right? And you had to speak to them, and sometimes, and you had to write about, I mean, you wrote about them.
Mhm.
And somehow I read this book. I was like, well, no one can really be mad at Dan. They might be upset about the scenario, but you walked a very fine line of giving the facts without really having anyone look too bad.
I mean, I tried. People can be mad about anything. You could tell them the truth and tell them what's going to be in the book, and they'd be like, cool. And then they read the book and then they're mad. But you told them what was going to be in the book, right? One of the things I really tried to do, the biggest sort of disagreements, right, happened between Dilla's mother, Maureen Yancey, and Dilla's erstwhile fiance, one-time fiance, Joylette Hunter, who is the mother of his youngest child, Jemiah. And I found them to be both credible, right, in different ways, but they disagreed on like a number of different interactions that I just could not resolve because there was nobody else in the room who would co-sign it, right? When there were people to like collaborate, I did that. When I couldn't, I would just take that stuff and put it in a footnote, right? They were in this room together, but what happened in the room, there's two different stories to it. And there was one, again, this story that his mother tells about a fight that he and Joylette had in the home that they shared. And, I had to file a Freedom of Information Act request to get the police report on that, just to see whether there was, where the truth lied. But what I really tried to do is, if there was any kind of back and or disagreement, that I would go to each person and say, okay, well, this is the other story. Is this true or not? And if I couldn't get a disagreement, again, I would put it in the footnote. But it was also part of another ethic that I had. And I know a lot of journalists don't do this, but I think it's really important because I write in the third person omniscient, which is I try to get inside the head of my characters, whatever they're telling me, and I'm writing it from behind their eyes, instead of writing it in sort of magazine style where it's all just quotes strung together. But that requires a great deal of responsibility. And so when I would do that, I would actually call my sources back and read back to them the sections that involve their thoughts, feelings, and actions, because I don't want to get it wrong. And most of the time I got it right, but sometimes I did get it wrong. And they would say, nope, that's not how it happened. Or no, that's not what I said. Right. And then you fix it and you make it better. And so the truth, as much as anybody can write the truth after the fact, the truth comes out. But, look, there's still people who are very married to their own version of events, or even the version that Dilla himself told them. Like Dilla told a lot of people he produced the album version of Janet Jackson's Got Till It's Gone. And I respect that. If you are Dilla's friend, if you are his family member, and James told you that he did it out of loyalty, out of love, whatever, I do not hold it against anyone that they would believe that James is telling them the truth. All I'm saying is I had not found any physical evidence or anecdotal evidence of James having produced that record. None of his friends saw him do it verifiably. There's no demo, right? Meanwhile, on the other side, there is tons of physical evidence and anecdotal evidence that it was produced as a tribute, essentially, to this Uma sound by Jam and Lewis. And, nobody who was involved with the record says that James was involved in any way. But people are mad about that. Then produce the evidence. Then produce the... Listen, I am happy to be wrong. Really, I will be the first person to say I got it wrong. But
I don't envy your position between production credits and a mom and spouse. It doesn't sound like a great spot to be in, but the book is great. If that makes you feel any better, great outcome. Sounds kind of stressful.
It doesn't make me feel one way or the other. I'm less concerned. I love all these people. I think they're great. I think they all have their strengths. My main thing is, did I tell the truth, and did I dig up everything that was supposed to be dug up in order to help to tell that truth? And then listen, I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know. And so the position in the book is not definite either. I have my own opinion, but the position in the book is more nuanced, right? All of it. I really tried to make it nuanced.
I think you said it well in the book. We'll leave it at that. Let's move to a segment. It's called Drop a Gem on 'em. It's a word association game. Tell me what comes to mind. Feeling, experience, personal story, anecdote, really anything. Little Brother, Loving It.
Oh, you're not going to play it?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So I don't know how we play this shit. I was like, you're going to play for me. Little Brother,
Sure.
Loving It. I mean, first of all, one of my best friends in the world is a guy by the name of James Lopez, who worked for Atlantic Records when Atlantic signed Little Brother off of ABB Records. And he said, oh, you got to hear these guys. It's like Tribe Called Quest all over again. It's just like hip hop used to be. And, I got to hear The Listening and then, their first album for Atlantic, The Minstrel Show, and fell in love from a distance with Phonte Coleman, right? As an MC, a personality, and, I was a fan. I never really felt that Atlantic was a great fit for them, and ultimately I don't think they felt it was a fit for them. But imagine my delight when my first book came out and Phonte fell in love with the book, The Big Payback. And so we became friends. And to this day, I'm like, I have to kind of pinch myself. I'm friends with Phonte Coleman. Like, that's my man. We ended up working together on the breaks. He did some amazing behind the scenes and on camera work for the breaks that will live in infamy. Uh, and he's just not only one of the world's greatest MCs of all time, but one of the world's greatest human beings. That's what that song makes me think of. And Ninth Wonder's cool too.
Yeah,
And
he's
Pooh.
cool. He's cool too. Yeah, I mean, he's a very talented person, a lot of great music. I especially like the way he goes through different genres with the singing and his work with foreign exchange. Song
Oh my
called
God.
House of Cards.
I
Fantastic song.
mean, and I gotta say, like, Lil Brother's best album is actually May the Lord Watch. To me, like, some of their best work is post Ninth Wonder. All due respect to Ninth Wonder, but like Pooh and Fonte, really, like, it's great to hear them sort of speak as men, at the top of their skill level, at the top of their partnership and brotherhood. You know,
All right. One for the moment in time that we're at. D'Angelo, Lady, DJ Premier remix.
yeah, I love both, right? That, of course, when you say that, I think of that incredible video that he did with all of sort of the guest lady friends,
Yeah.
D'Angelo's guest lady friends. But it's wild. I talk a lot about D'Angelo's fruitful partnership with Amir and the crew that created Voodoo, but in many ways, his partnership with Raphael Sadiq has yielded the most I don't know, bangers. I mean, like the D'Angelo we know, and the reason that D'Angelo is able to kind of have this extended career is because of some of these collaborations that he did with Raphael.
The song Be Here off Raphael Sadiq's album is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great chemistry. Yeah. Fantastic
A great
combination.
unsung, undersung talent, Raphael Sadiq, one of the great songwriters and producers of our era, and certainly D'Angelo, indispensable to D'Angelo's career.
Excellent. J Dilla, D'Angelo, Those Dreamin' Eyes of Mine remix off the
Yeah.
JD Unreleased EP.
Yeah, I think it was Shoes, maybe, who sort of rescued a lot of these well, some context. When James first broke into the business, he, like a lot of us when we first got into this, we were very eager. You ask me to do 3 things, I'll do 5. You ask me to do 10 things, I'll do 20. Somebody would ask him for a remix and he'd give a label 3 options, right? He would do unsolicited remixes just to see if he could get the work, right? Or even just to do them, right? Because they needed to be done. Dreamin' Eyes of Mine remix that he did is one of the great early examples of Dilla chopping expertise, and the fact that we only know it in retrospect is a bit of a crime. But not everybody was understood what they were looking at. Even me in '99, as much as I had, deliberately come out there to work with JD, there were things about him that I saw and a lot of things that I had yet to see.
Special Ed, Freaky Flow, DJ Premier remix.
Man, I don't even know that song. What album is that off of?
It was after his first 2 main albums.
Yeah, but see, after that, after Legal, I had left Profile, and so I was less familiar with his catalog. I have to say, Special Ed is a great guy, man. And I had a chance to work with him again, with the breaks. He was just a great guy, man, and I'm so glad that he did what he did. And I like as much as the first album is great and broke him out, that second album with Howie T, God bless Howie T, R.I.P., was amazing.
He's a great star. Was one of those rappers who was popular at a really young age.
Yeah.
And this song, Freaky Flow, was an album that came out almost like he didn't have anything in a long time. Maybe a new generation of people were listening to music, and his earlier albums came out when they were kids. And just to hear him come back with Premier, who was on fire at that point, I think I thought I'd bring that one up. Ahmad Jamal, Swahiland.
Oh.
Am I even pronouncing that right?
Swahili land.
Even better.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's the source of the sample for Dilla's production of De La Soul Stakes is High. Ahmad Jamal, Jay had a really interesting relationship with a few jazz artists, relationship as somebody who was attracted to their music. And Ahmad Jamal was one of them. Herbie Hancock was one of them. Oh God. Of course I'm blanking, but he loved Brazilian music. He gravitated towards harmonies that were really dense and clustered, whether it was like the vocalies of Singers Unlimited or Manhattan Transfer, or the playing of Ahmad Jamal. He liked that sort of dark, sort of Ahmad Jamal, Bill Evans kind of really clustered harmonies, because they embody a kind of melancholy in a way. And so in his beats, you get this, just like with Ahmad Jamal, you get this sort of confluence of life, ebullience and melancholy.
Well said. Grand Poobah 2000.
Ha! Best DeBarge sample and best Burt Bacharach sample ever.
Yeah. I really liked that song, that album. I think that song was produced by Minnesota producer who did a lot
Was
of
that was what's his name? Mark Spark. Wasn't it Mark Spark?
Oh, yeah, you might be right. Actually, I stand corrected.
I could be wrong. I'm just saying my memory says Mark Spark.
You might be right. I mean, I'm glad we're talking about this. Not everyone that I speak to who could recall that. So that's really good. I think it was a Cal Jader sample, but either way.
Cal Jader doing Never My Love, which is a Burt Bacharach song. Yeah.
About Donuts. I love a lot of it. The song Waves, one of my favorite.
Right.
How much of it was done by Dilla or finished by others?
I don't think anything was finished by others. I think there was an initial sort of CD that Dilla generated, and I believe he did it out after he emerged from the hospital the first time in California, somewhere around March of 2005. And he gave it to Wolf, who gave it to Jeff Jank. And Jeff Jank asked James for permission to extend the length of some of those beats. 2-track, right? So they were 2-track mixes, and he used Pro Tools to sort of chop and extend a few of them, to join two of them together to create other ones that were a little longer than they were. And then when Jank, I think, had been through most of that process, he said, well, the running time of this CD is not going to be that long. Do you have a few more beats we can add? And those beats were added at the time that Dilla was in and out of the hospital. Jank himself, nor does anybody know what was generated in the hospital. But they were then given to Jank, who then sequenced them, right, into this larger whole. Jank named them, right, and then checked the names with James. You have to remember, right, that James was very, very sick at this time. When he was in the hospital, he was there because he was not doing well. When he was there because he needed plasmapheresis and he needed dialysis. And those are exhausting procedures.
Am I right in the timeline that as he was making donuts, some of it was within months of his passing?
It could very well be, although Donuts was ready, I think, in October of 2005, and it was released in February. So the master was already there and ready. So it couldn't have been any earlier. It couldn't have been any later, I think, than October, because the master, this master sequence was already established.
Okay.
Although,
Brooklyn,
Wolf and Jank have the last word on this. I guess for me, the distinction is, look, there's a myth about he did all of Donuts in the hospital. He did it on an SP 404 or 303. And okay, but that's not what his friends say. And, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here to tell the tale. Brooklyn's Finest, Jay-Z featuring Biggie, Notorious B.I.G., produced by DJ Clark Kent.
Well, listen, Clark Kent, man, legend in the business, and quiet as kept. Like, Clark Kent could deliver some bangers. I knew him as a DJ, but like, he did Get Money by Junior Mafia. He did something for Chino's second album, that same album that JD did a couple of beats for, that was just amazing. I remember, like, we were paying Clark a lot of money, and we didn't really have a lot of money. Like, we had a good budget, but we didn't have a lot of money. And I wanted a Junior Mafia type beat from Clark, and Clark sent me some stuff that was just like, And I had to call Clark. I'm like, and you know how hard that is to call a producer and tell them that the beat that they just sent you ain't shit. And I call him like, Clark, I know you can do better than this. Come on, man. And he sent me a beat that was absolutely ridiculous. And that's the one we used.
Okay. It's everyone who talks about DJ Clark Kent has such a positive impression. He told the truth. He's a New Yorker, right? If he liked something, he didn't like something, he said it. And that, I mean, his taste was his currency. Some of the best ears out there. And I remember when I first moved to New York, I was with a friend of mine. We make beats and we're kind of just walking around. We met him in a shoe store. It's like, oh, hey, Clark Kent. And he talked to us for like 45 minutes. He's like, here, take my number and then meet me here. And I proceeded to see him many times. In that conversation, I go to him like, hey, man, we've been talking for like an hour just sitting here. And, in Toronto, I found it very hard to get on as an artist and as a producer. He's like, man, you're here. You could be the one. And he kind of made everyone feel that way. So I found he had this personal quality about him that was very likable.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That sounds like Clark.
All right. I'll ask you one more. Fat Cat, Dedication to Suckers, 12-inch.
Well, again, produced by JD, of course, and that beat, I believe, was on that same beat tape that we got, that same year. Shoes, of course, legend. He is the first person to actually put his money where his mouth was when it came to JD's career. Like, as JD. Like, he was the first person to say, JD, you need your own record, and put his money behind it. And then he was the first, not the first person, but, believed enough in Fat Cat and JD to put out that 12-inch, right? And this is in the years after Fat Cat had that initial deal with Payday. But both of those guys, man, Shoes and Cat, if you're lucky enough to be in conversation with them, you are lucky enough to be with two people who will tell you the truth about anything. That I have so much respect for those two guys. Can't even, the depth, like, those guys will, if you end up being lucky enough to be their friend, you're in a good spot.
That's good, because I would bet you interact with them quite a bit.
Not enough. Believe me, I don't see them either of them enough, but when I do, I'm very happy.
I'll say this: House Shoes, incredibly nice guy, great with people, great speaker, and He was one of my first guests on this show that was well known. So he gives people a shot.
Yeah.
Great guy.
But that's what he does. House Shoes invests his energy in people. That's what folks don't understand about him. He invested so much in James without any desire for recompense, right? I mean, I think he can feel bad sometimes when people sort of leave him out of the narrative, but he can't be. There is none of that without, at least Slum Village, like he pushed and pushed and pushed. You know, yeah.
You've shared so much. We've went on various topics and different phases of your life, your opinion, so many stories. There's, I'm sure, many more. I'll ask you a question about where you are today. What do you care about at this time?
Whew. Well, I'm most concerned with the rise of fascism and authoritarianism in the United States. It's my home, right? I'm a New Yorker. New York is my nationality. I want the city to be protected. And I believe in the experiment, the grand social experiment that is New York. I am, really against all kinds of imperialism and genocide and all kinds of triumphalism. And we seem to be battling all of these things at the same time. And it's really discouraging. And so it's hard many times to even think about life as an artist, writing about things. It makes these topics that you and I are talking about feel mundane. But you have to remember that this is also why we live. We live for the joy of being human, and central to being human is the musical impulse, the artistic impulse, the impulse to create beauty. It's just all of this horrible triumphalist fascist stuff makes it so difficult to just be human.
Thanks for sharing what's on your mind. I get you, right? I hear you. I empathize with a lot of what you're saying. If you were to look on the next season of your life, and if it were successful, what would have happened?
I don't know. I guess because for the first time, I feel like I'm okay. Like I don't. I. I mean, and maybe that's a healthy place to be. Like I am. I gotta knock. I gotta knock wood here. I mean, I have. I don't know how to put it. Like I feel like I've done some good work, and that I don't have to necessarily be totally identified with that work in order to feel good, because I also have a family that I love, and who loves me. I have great friends who I love and who love me. I mean, what else do we have in this life? I mean, I think maybe what I would like to do is, if there's a way for me to use what I have to help with that bigger stuff. See, now I'm speaking myself into it. I'm getting myself into trouble now. Now God's gonna drop it on me somehow. I'd be like, oh fuck. But yeah, I feel very much at peace right now. Just personally speaking, as the world burns slowly around us. But I am really proud of Dilla Time, in the sense that I feel like I worked on it till they yanked the manuscript out of my hands. That to the very last moment I was reporting. One of those last moments was a call I got at the dinner table as I was sitting down in Detroit to eat dinner with my mother-in-law and my wife and my son. This phone call comes, and I'm like, I gotta go. I get up from the dinner table and I run upstairs, and I spend 2 hours on the phone with somebody who I've been waiting to talk to, and I thought, they're never going to call, right? A year later, my mother-in-law says, you know, Danny, I remember last year you got up in the middle of dinner to go take a phone call, and I thought that was so rude. I'm like, doesn't this kid have any home training? You know, he's been part of this family. Do you know you don't get up in the middle of dinner? And I said, but mommy, it was D'Angelo. And she said, who's D'Angelo? And that was who I spoke to that night, right, for 2 hours. And he spoke at length about James. And I had a chance to speak to him after that night and tell him the story of that. You know, my mother-in-law, you know, still being mad that I got up from the dinner table because of you. But I'm eternally grateful for that, man. Like, that he spoke up for James in that moment. And we spent 2 hours talking about nothing but that. I was not, and maybe that's why he was okay with talking, because I was not asking him, when's your next album going to come out? You know, that wasn't the nature of the conversation. We were talking about music he loved and a person he loved. And he was fantastic.
What a life, Dan. You really, really put yourself in some interesting scenarios and
really.
some
And I continue to do that.
Keep it going. I love to hear. I'm so excited to hear and see what comes next. I'm cheering for you.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me bend your ear.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much. Peace.
Thank you.